Today we'll be discussing the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by the great modernist poet T.S. Eliot. Elsewhere on my page, I have a series on his other quite famous poem, The Wasteland, from 1922, that was recorded a number of years ago, if you'd like to pursue those videos. For today, we're going to look at this poem, which in many ways is considered one of the great quintessential poems of the modern era. Eliot and his voice became one of the leading influences in that, one of the leading influential voices in that era. He and Ezra Pound sort of breaking new ground with this innovative modernist approach to poetry. For Eliot, this is in 1915 that we have this poem right at the heart of the First Great World War. For Eliot, part of his structure and his style here cuts two ways. In one way, you have a very innovative technique with his modern poetry where you have these jump cuts from scene to scene. There's no real linear narrative to this poem. It's very fragmented and brittle. And in that regard, he's responding to the landscape of the modern era. So he, in many of his poems, he believes that poetry must startle the reader. It must challenge the reader's assumptions. Gone are the days of the sing-songy rhyme and meter of yesteryear. For Eliot, poetry had to be precise and methodical and attempt to get to the very bottom of what it means to be a human in the modern world, when we are faced with so much social alienation, so much of a haunted landscape with the fallout of the war to end all wars. And so in many ways, what he's doing is quite modern, quite new. But at the same time, as we'll see when we go through the poem, Eliot relies heavily on these classical influences of the past. He makes many allusions to Shakespeare. This opening epigraph is a quotation from Dante's Inferno. You have biblical allusions, references to Michelangelo. So in one regard, Eliot is drawing from this rich tradition of the Western world in order to establish meaning and in order to navigate the modern world, while at the same time recognizing the modern world might not be navigable at all. Suppose we are completely severed from and completely unmoored from these traditions of the past. Again, in his poem, The Wasteland, which he wrote after Prufrock, you see a much more detailed sense of that loss, where he says, all we have are a heap of broken images. And so in Prufrock here, we're going to have this reliance on an old poetic tradition, the love song. It goes back centuries. And yet we have the love song of this very thoroughly modern man, J. Alfred Prufrock, who he himself, as he speaks this poem, will recognize that he is not Hamlet. He is not John the Baptist. He is not Lazarus. That these biblical and literary and classical allusions no longer apply, that perhaps I cannot see myself in this great human story. Perhaps I'm utterly isolated from and alienated from the past, isolated from and alienated from others, as we'll see, and he goes into this dinner party, this social scene, and he discovers to his great distress that he can't flourish in this jungle of a society. That what if I'm completely disconnected from my fellow man? How do I establish anything like human reason and purpose and meaning in this modern wasteland, this modern environment? This opening epigraph is drawn from Dante's Inferno. It's from Canto 27, where Dante has ascended into this circle of hell where he meets Guido de Montefeltro. And he is listening to Montefeltro's story. And Montefeltro speaks to Dante, much like Prufrock is about to speak to us, about his story. Montefeltro is telling us that that he would never reveal or divulge the depths of his story of his sinful life on earth if he believed that the story he was going to tell would be remembered or would be repeated. But if it would never make its way from the underworld back to earth, then he feels a sense of solace and a sense of safety in telling his inner story. So the summary, the translation of this epigraph goes as follows. This is from Montefeltro to Dante. Quote, "If I thought that my reply would be to someone who would ever return to earth, this flame would remain without further movement. But as no one has ever returned alive from this gulf, if what I hear is true, I can answer you with no fear of infamy." So again, this idea of confession, of admission of this inner monologue that Montefeltro tells Dante, that if I thought that this would get out, if I thought that this would return to earth, I would never speak again. But since I have no fear of this internal story ever really being heard by someone else, then I feel a sense of safety in telling it. So that's going to set the tone, this epigraph, for how we read Prufrock's narration in this poem. So let's begin. "Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table." So this opening simile establishes much of the mood of the poem here, that we begin with this rather romantic invitation. There's a rhyme, there's fluid language. "Let us go then, you and I." This conjunction establishing some sense of partnership or fellowship. You and I will go on this great walk, this journey, this quest, a pilgrimage together. This classical trope of two comrades walking down the street together, going on a journey, a quest. This is the beginning of a quest narrative. "Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky." Rather interesting imagery there of this evening that is spread out before them, filled with opportunities. The evening is spread out against the open sky. "Let us go then, you and I." And Prufrock doesn't tell us who he's speaking to. He might be speaking to you and me, the reader. He might be speaking to just this nebulous other. Some critics read this as Prufrock speaking to himself, that you have these two different divided selves within Prufrock, so that this internal monologue is more of an internal dialogue in this almost schizophrenic sense. Regardless, the romanticism of these opening two lines is twisted by the time we get to this simile, that the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. So immediately we get this sense of numbness and paralysis from the anesthesia. Again, a modern medical development for Eliot in his time. The poem is going to be filled with all of these nods to modernism. He's going to mention movie cameras as a magic lantern later. He mentions lamplight. And then here we have an etherized patient. C.S. Lewis famously hated that simile, that Lewis and T.S. Eliot had this ongoing difference of opinion about poetry and poetic form. Lewis was much more of a classicist and a traditionalist with poetry, and Eliot, of course, was a modernist. But this sense of a patient, one who has been numbed, one who has been put under, as it were, on a table to be dissected or to be worked on, Prufrock is going to return to that image as we go, where he's going to feel dissected by the glaring eyes of those at this party that he feels the weight of, that he's going to feel examined. So again, adding this sense of connection to the whole setting, not just Prufrock, but the whole setting. The evening is spread out like a patient etherized upon a table, gives us this foreboding sense to the poem that there's a great deal of anxiety, a patient facing surgery, a patient about to be probed and prodded by surgical instruments, a person entirely at the mercy of the surgeon, it's going to evoke this sense of helplessness and paralysis or numbness in the poem. So he repeats his invitation, let us go, through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights, in one night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. You see all the diction here, that again, things perhaps not being the way they once were, or being the way they ought to be, that the streets are half-deserted and the nights are restless. That gives us a sense of human nature at work in this poem. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. I love that. That assonance there, repetition of insidious intent. But again, the intentions of this argument of insidious intent lead to an overwhelming question. And this concept of the question is going to haunt the entirety of the poem for Prufrock, to the point where immediately when the question is evoked, he says, oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. So this refrain of let us go, it begins as this familiar characteristic of a poem to us, the beginning of a great journey. But then as we keep hearing it, we wonder if this let us go has a different formulation to it. Letting somebody go means letting them free, relinquishing your grip on them, letting them go from anything like a prison or like an inhibiting bind on them. And so that phrase, let us go, for Prufrock is going to become a different sort of phrase, where throughout the whole poem, Prufrock is going to feel stymied, hindered, in the grip of questions beyond his ability to answer. Do not ask, what is it? He's going to feel in the grip of social pressures. He's going to feel the grip of other people's perspectives of him, even real or imagined. He's going to feel inhibited entirely, to the point where he is indecisive and inactive. He's going to bring up many references to Hamlet in this poem, and that's one of the prevailing senses that Hamlet experiences in the play. Although Hamlet is a great prince and a great tragic hero, Prufrock, of course, being none of those, yet there's this abiding sense of inactivity, indecision, the difficulty of knowing what is true and what is right and what one ought to do. Prufrock is going to feel that same pressure. And so let us go becomes this plea or a cry for help, to be let go of the burden of consciousness, the burden of social expectations, the burden of human life. So he comes back to that phrase. And this question, again, the question, going back to Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question. Prufrock is not ready for the question. Hamlet asks it. Hamlet says to be or not to be, that is the question. But Prufrock is terrified of the question, much less the dizzying array of possible answers. And for him, the question is overwhelming to the point where he does not even want to ask it. And so the what is it question could be the question the reader would ask. What is the question, Prufrock? But for Prufrock, what is it? What if this is the question? What is it? All of it. The fear of it. The meaning of life, the nature of the cosmos, and man's place in it. What is this world? What is this human experience? What is this day? What is this life that I'm living? And he says, oh, don't ask. What is it? Let us go. Let me free of this burden of needing to ask the question. In the room, the women come and go. Talking of Michelangelo, we have this refrain that he's going to repeat as he goes throughout the poem. We get the sense that he's at the dinner party. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. One of these great allusions that Eliot will continue to bring up. We think of Michelangelo's David, this quintessential man We think of Michelangelo's great artwork, his depiction of the creation of Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, somebody who is the source of great human contemplation. And yet, Prufrock is not talking of Michelangelo, and he's not being talked of by these women. They come and go past him, speaking of other things. And so Prufrock is not able to make a connection. Prufrock is not able to connect himself with the past. He's being bypassed in many ways. He describes the setting, the yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. So this portrayal of the setting here, the atmosphere in which Prufrock finds himself as yellow, this sense of faded, yellow as this almost mustard gas type image. Again, in the context of World War I, we can imagine being surrounded by yellow smoke that has this aggressive character to it. Licks its tongue into the corners of the evening, makes sudden leaps, large enough to curl itself around the house, and yet it's fog. This notion of blindness, the inability to see or discern. Fog has this classic symbolism tied to it of obscurity, of the inability to discern what is in front of you. And he describes it as a yellow fog that wraps itself around the entire environment. And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. So this repetition, there will be time, again, can be interpreted a variety of ways. We perhaps see Prufrock procrastinating here. There will be time. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder. There will be time to create. Time for all the works and days of hands. So Prufrock's sense of delay, in tension with his urgency here, this is going to create a feeling for the reader that perhaps Prufrock does not feel like he has the confidence or the wherewithal to be able to act today. But maybe there will be time. This sense of hopefulness in Prufrock. That perhaps there will be time for all the works and days of hands. That if it be not now, it will be then, to quote Hamlet. At the end of Hamlet, he tells Horatio that there's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be not now, it will be then. If it be not then, it will be now. That we can rest in this providence that may be guiding all things in its own time. Again, this is something for Eliot that was a cherished belief of the traditions past, that there's a God that is providing for and is sovereign over all of the workings of our hands, and the fall of a sparrow. That's a quotation straight from the Gospels. And so for Prufrock, perhaps there's a consolation in thinking that there will be time to do all of the things. All the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. This question that Prufrock is faced with, the question, what is it? Well, maybe there will be time to address it. Will be a time to answer it. Time for you and me. But also, if it's not this hopefulness, it's a pressing reminder of Prufrock's mortality. Indeed, your mortality and mine, that we inhabit time. Time will be there. Today, tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, there will be time. It will be there. So as long as we are alive, we are burdened by the finite nature of our time, that we inhabit finitude. We inhabit a particular context, a particular setting. We are in a particular house with particular conflicts and particular struggles. And so this culminates in this final statement. He says, there's time yet for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. So in the minutes that occur before the taking of toast and tea, these very banal, mundane, ritual customs that we have as human beings, that we arise, we brush our teeth, we take our toast and tea. Later on, he says he measures his life in coffee spoons. In those little, seemingly insignificant moments, he says there's time for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions. And this is one of our great introductions to Eliot's view of anxiety here that Prufrock feels, that in a single given minute, there is time for 100 indecisions, all within that 1 minute. And many of us know this to be true, that in a single minute, your mind can go through 100 possibilities, options, choices, decisions, what ifs. If I do A, then that means I'm not doing B. If I choose to wear this or do that or say this or think that, then what if I will regret it and want to unthink it or wish I did something different? These are the 100 indecisions and visions and revisions that Prufrock is contemplating. This is something that the 19th century philosopher Soren Kierkegaard famously referred to as the dizziness of freedom. That anxiety for Kierkegaard is the dizziness of freedom, that because man is so free, especially modern man, with a near infinite number of options to choose from, for every choice he makes, he is not choosing millions and millions and millions of potential choices, potential possibilities. And that amount of freedom can make one insecure and dizzy. If I go to the grocery store and there are 2 options of cereal to choose from, and I choose one, then I'm not choosing one. So I have a 50% chance of being satisfied. But if I go to the grocery store and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different possibilities for cereal, and that's a silly example, but you get the idea that who I marry, where I go to college, where I gain employment, where I buy a house, the number of children I have, all of these things are choices that we can become crippled by because we have become modern beings that have a near infinite number of free choices to make. And so for Prufrock, these 100 indecisions become the paralyzing factor, the sense of numbness and paralysis we get by not knowing how we are to navigate the minutes of our day. What should I do? What should I not do? Who do I talk to? So again, in the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare? Do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. So, do I dare? Right? This is the question of choice. Do I dare to make choice A? Do I dare to make choice B? Do I dare to make choice C? What will result of those choices? And so he's wondering within himself, do I dare to do A? Do I dare to do B? Do I dare to do C? Do I dare to move forward? Or do I turn back away from this party and descend the stair to exit? Which that takes this melancholy sense as well, because if this party, this social occasion that Prufrock is trying to respond to and navigate and flourish in. Turning back and descending the stair is this interesting description of exiting society, exiting life. If I can't navigate this party, if I can't make decisions to move forward, then should I just exit? It takes this sense of almost suicidal sense. Again, back to Hamlet. Do I take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, do I shuffle off this mortal coil? And so descending the stair becomes this interesting option that he has to exit the whole human experience altogether by exiting his humanity. There's this sense that will emerge here that this modern world is downstream of these themes of social Darwinism, that if the modern world is a jungle where the strong will survive and the weak will die out, then how do I, this balding, simple man with thin arms and legs, how do I gain a mate? How do I become somebody who is a candidate for reproduction? Suppose Prufrock is not physically attractive. Suppose he is an inferior male and he's going to be judged by his external appearance. That's what he goes on to talk about. I'll descend the stair, but then they'll notice my bald spot. And they will say how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin. I'm dressed appropriately. My necktie is rich and modest, but asserted by a simple tie clip. Suppose Prufrock is crippled by this sense of inhibition, that perhaps I am not a viable candidate for the sexual selection process. Perhaps I'm unfit for this landscape, for this modern world, and therefore I just turn around and leave. They will say how his arms and legs are thin. And so now the dare of surviving, the dare of playing the game of life and navigating this Lord of the Flies sort of circumstance gets ratcheted up to the cosmic level with a cosmic contemplation from Prufrock. Do I dare disturb the universe? Do any of my choices make a cosmic dent at all? Or am I a pawn in an indifferent universe that whether I play the game well or I play the game poorly, whether I succeed or fail, whether I win or lose, it doesn't make any ultimate difference? Do my choices make any sort of ultimate consequence? In a minute, in a single minute, there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse. If all of the weight of my decisions within a single minute can be undone or revised within another minute, and if my life is merely the accumulation of so many minutes, how can there be anything like human meaning and transcendent purpose and value to life like the people prior to me had believed? That up until the 20th century, it was a widely regarded notion that man was made with purpose and meaning and value in community, with religious relationship to being made in the image of God, that life was providentially guided by a loving Father. If all of those things are no longer part of this modern world, and it's just this competition, if it's a world war, and I'm just J. Alfred Prufrock, then do I matter? Becomes the question that we don't want to ask. Do not ask, what is it? It overwhelms us. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voice is dying with a dying fall. Another Shakespeare reference to Twelfth Night there. Beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? So we'll close this video with this contemplation of a rather simple and memorable yet quite melancholy line. And we'll pick up the rest of the poem in another video. Here he says, I have measured out my life. Subject, I. The verb, have measured out. The direct object, my life. So here, Prufrock is considering what the implications are for having a life that is measured out. I have reached the sum of my life. I have figured out, I've measured it with coffee spoons. So now this prepositional phrase takes a historically rich philosophical tradition of measuring out one's life. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. And so Prufrock is taking up that same contemplation. How do I take the measure of my human life? What does it mean? What is its value? And then, of course, now with this social setting he's in, how do I measure out? What is the measurement of my life? Where do I fit in the grand scheme of things? What is the measure of my life? What is the value of my life? What is the consequence of my life? What is the full extent to which it has an effect on anyone else or anything else? This beautiful contemplation of human life that has been going on for generations, Prufrock picks it up. He says, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. This habitual, banal, rote system of marking my days, that in the mornings I wake up, I brush my teeth, I get dressed, and I make coffee. I go to work, I come home from work, I have dinner, I go to bed. I wake up, I brush my teeth, I get dressed, I make coffee. Then now, suddenly, we have this Dante-esque view of the cyclical and spiraling view of life. That in Dante's Inferno, hell is a series of cyclical, spiraling circles that lead down to the very bottom of things. And so for Prufrock, this realization that what if my life is easily measurable, not by great questions, not by desires for transcendent purpose, not by the strength of my community, but what if my life is easily measured with something as mundane and trivial as coffee spoons? That the sum of my being can be measured by the sum of the coffee spoons of my days. That what if at the end of my life I did not make any sort of spiritual or metaphysical footprint, but rather my life was merely a certain sum of coffee spoons.